What's going on, guys? Today is the day that we are going to start pulling the drivetrain out of the donor Mustang. So if you did not see my last video, I bought a 2017 GT Mustang that was very crashed at auction to steal the Gen 2 Coyote 6-speed auto trans and the complete IRS out of to put into the F100 shop truck. So in the last video, I had a buddy of mine who is a locksmith make us a set of keys, so we were able to get it started. It did have a funny noise when it first started up. I later figured out it was because the driver's side motor mount is broken, causing the engine to be like an inch or so lower on that side, and the alternator pulley was contacting the sway bar mount. So later on this past weekend, I pulled the car out, did a 180, pulled it back in, so it's easier for me to pull the drivetrain out. I went ahead and jacked up that side of the engine and restarted the car. I'll throw a clip in there now so you can hear what it sounded like. So as you can hear, it is perfect. It fires right up, no funny noises, no smoke, no issues whatsoever. So we are good to go to pull this thing out. First thing I need to do is get the ECU and part of the wiring harness removed, because we are sending those off to a company called Mars. I'll throw a link in the description below. They are going to be modifying my wiring harness, removing a bunch of unneeded wires, putting in a standalone fuse block, that kind of stuff, and removing the PATS, which is the passive anti-theft system, which is a system in Ford cars that requires you to have the RFID security key to start these things. We need to remove that so that this whole thing can be run standalone, because it's going to be in a 64 F100. So they're going to be doing all of those modifications for us. Again, I'll throw a link in the description below. I'll go over more of that when we actually get the engine in the car, but that's the first thing I need to do because we have to mail that thing out. So there are two main wiring harnesses under the hood of these cars. They only need one of them. So one of them goes from the ECU just directly to the engine. It connects to all of the fuel injection, all of that kind of stuff. They don't need that one. That one's going to remain unmodified. They need the one that plugs into, I have to double check on their website, Terminal A on the ECU, I believe. That's the one that runs to the rest of the car. So it runs into the driver's footwell, to the drive-by-wire throttle pedal, as well as the OBD2 port, somewhere around the rest of the front of this car, to the fuse box, and around a bunch of other places. So that's the one we need to identify and start to trace around and unplug. And then I need to unbolt the ECU, because that's going to be going with it, of course. Been digging around for maybe half an hour or so. I have the ECU out, that was easy enough. And I've started to just unbolt everything I can find, because this harness is what we need to pull out. And it runs all the way under the battery box back there, up to the front of the car. This main guy right here is what we're after, and it connects to a bunch of stuff and then disappears kind of along the frame rail, runs back into the car itself. I'm coming to terms with the fact that it's more trouble than it's worth for me to try and dig around and get in there to unhook everything if we're pulling all this out anyway. So I'm just going to start doing that. I'm going to literally start from the front, start removing core supports, and we'll drain the cooling system, and we'll just work our way back and get more and more access to things as we go, because it's all got to come out. It's the next morning, made really good progress yesterday. You can see we have the entire cooling system, all the radiator core support, all that stuff out of the way. Underneath the car, I got the drive shaft, the kind of catback exhaust system, all of that removed as well. So we are getting pretty close. So my goal now is I want to get basically to the point where we can drop this entire front subframe with the engine, the transmission, the headers, all of that stuff connected to it. Because that stuff will be way easier to pull off with the whole system out of the car. So I've never done this before, but I'm pretty sure I'll be able to just kind of disconnect the top of the struts, brake lines, maybe wire or two on each side. Transmission cross member, anything that's connected to the body under there. We should be pretty close. Up here, I'm gonna need to disconnect heater lines, AC lines, probably a couple of more grounds. These are pretty cool engines. From what I can tell, the wiring is super modular. Like I was mentioning earlier in the video, there is just one whole wiring harness that kind of just stays with the engine, and it's just one giant connection right up to the ECU. So we don't really have a ton of wires we have to disconnect. I don't have to disconnect all of the like cam phasers and injectors and all that kind of stuff, to the best of my knowledge. What else is there? Steering shaft. I'm sure I'm forgetting some stuff, but that's what I'm gonna start doing now, is just going around, checking every part of the engine, making sure it's all free. Then we'll start to unbolt the subframe. I'm gonna go grab my pallet jack. I think that'll be the best scenario for us to lower this thing down, raise the pallet jack up as high as it'll go, undo the subframe bolts. I'll be able to lower the pallet jack and then raise the car off of it to kind of separate the two. Then we can just wheel the whole assembly out of the way. I don't see anything obvious. Going down with this for now. Okay. Should I go up with the lift a little bit? All right, so had a little bit of an angle. Oh, I lied. Speedometer, or not speedometer, like ABS wire on this side. Cable is going to be in my way, but we officially have separation. I have to give it to Ford. They did a good job, and you can make all the jokes you want about, yeah, they made it easy to pull the engine because you knew you were going to have to or whatever, but the fact that I did not have to go through and undo, like, I'm not even exaggerating, there's probably 40 wiring connections on this engine. That might even be low. I don't even know what half this stuff does. The fact that I did not have to do that saved me hours of work. I can't imagine having to dig back here and trying to unplug these things, whatever that is. Like, oh, on LS motors, you have to unplug everything, but there's like maybe 10 connections on the whole engine. They're just way simpler. So excellent job, Ford, making it easy to pull these out. Now I'm back to the task at hand, which is getting this wiring harness out. So even despite there being no engine, this thing still just like disappears into the firewall way back under there, disappears into the firewall way back into the passenger footwell. I think this is still going to take a good amount of wrestling to get out, so I better get after it. After maybe another 45 minutes to an hour of wrestling, I prevailed. This thing is nuts. Look at all these connections. I mean, this is basically the wiring harness for, it is the wiring harness from basically your foot forward all the way in the car. Everything from like ABS to wheel speed sensors, windshield wiper motor, windshield wiper fluid sprayer, all of that stuff is part of this harness. naturally we're not going to need any of that, which is why we are sending it off to get modified. So we have our ECU to, terminal A on the ECU plugs into here. It goes into our fuse block and all the way around. I'm not going to bother. I don't even know what half this stuff does, but this giant mess of spaghetti is going to be torn down and transformed into this. So again, company's called Mars. Those are the guys that are helping me out on this. So it's going to be totally stripped out of all of those junk things we're not going to use, and it's going to be simplified to just a couple chassis grounds and then main wiring plugs into the ECU, and it comes with a custom fuse block that is just the fuses we need. So it's fans, fuel pump, that kind of stuff, but it's not ABS modules and a bunch of other stuff that comes on a factory car. So a simplified fuse block is part of this deal, and it's going to be much, much simpler to install in the truck that way. Again, I also am going to have the PATs deleted, so we will not have to have any kind of special key. We'll be able to just run a standard 1964 Ford ignition key to get this thing fired up. Rear subframe looks pretty straightforward. I'm just going to undo any wiring, brake lines, top of the shocks, e-brake cable from each side, and that's pretty much all I can tell. It looks like there's just one big bolt in the back here, another one that goes through this smaller bracket there. So I'll undo all of that, probably undo the small brackets. We'll lower the car down. Maybe I'll put some jack stands or something underneath it, then undo the big bolts and ideally just lift the car right off the subframe. I believe I have everything disconnected, so we should be able to lift up and leave the rear end down. Let's see. I've spent an hour or two this morning going through the entire chassis, just thinking about every possibility of a part I might be able to utilize on the truck. Because anything that I can use off of this chassis is just going to save us money in the future. So I pulled off stuff like the brake pedal, the booster and master cylinder, the brake lines, the fuel line, and gas tank. Pretty slim chance, but I may be able to adapt that gas tank under the bed of the truck, kind of right in the location it was in the Mustang in front of the rear subframe. TBD on that, but I need to pull it out to be able to test it when that time comes. I did take out the factory fuel line. This isn't going to work with our setup because I will need to convert to a return style system. We'll worry about that in the future. Emergency brake cables, all of that kind of stuff. Everything that I could think of I pulled out. Got the rear suspension cleaned up. I actually don't know if I showed you guys this or not. So this is a complete Crown Vic front suspension off a 2011 Crown Vic. Has the brakes and everything. I'm going to try to adapt the Mustang brakes, but we will utilize most everything else on here except for the rack and pinion. I'm going to utilize the electric power steering, but yeah. So I got that all cleaned up. You guys already saw the exhaust, and that's the rear brake line. So I believe, fingers crossed, I have stripped this thing of everything we might need. And now that that's done, I start the long process of cleaning, organizing all of these parts so that I don't forget what we have and what we need, and figuring out how in the world to get this chassis out of here onto my trailer. I might just try to put it on some dollies and drag it up with the winch. I don't really know, but it's going to live on my trailer for the next month or two until this truck is done, just so that there's nothing else I try and steal off of it. Then I'm imagining we're just going to have to scrap this thing. I don't know who would utilize this. Maybe I could sell it to a junkyard. I don't know. If you guys know anything about that, feel free to leave a comment below. I'm going to call it for this video. I know this is a really long one. If you guys are still here at this point, thank you very much. I appreciate you watching. Next video, we're going to pull the truck in and get to work on it.